Thank you very much. Big words of measuring the world out there. This is just one try and how we could measure the quality of bioculture. Thank you all for bearing with us until this late hour. This presentation is very much about the interface, or the lack thereof, between design and economics as one of the ways in terms of measuring bioculture or trying to put numbers behind the quality. In this case, design quality. And this is working. So this is very briefly what I'm going to talk about in the introduction. I'll try to make a case and try and scope the problem, particularly trying to argue that delivering quality in the built environment is a certain tragedy of the commons. In the actual discussion of pricing quality, I will talk about the measures that are there, particularly focusing on office property, or as we call it, the workscapes. And I'll try to cover, I'll try to wrap everything up, particularly by trying to sketch a way forward. And as I say in the introduction, I try and argue, especially about that high-quality bioculture, so delivering high quality in the built environment, is a tragedy of the commons. How so? Say over, like last year, what we had is the Davos Declaration, and what they came up with was like looking or an like observation. There is a big loss of quality in the built environment, and that is high time that we should do something about it. Fair enough. Some 10 years ago, or over a decade ago, Chris Webster said that like delivery of quality built environment is particularly what he calls a type 1 tragedy of the commons, that is particularly associated with the undersupply of the professional services that deliver this quality, especially what we have now as designers, planners, architects, etc. And this is quite important. It's really important to understand why is this undersupply of these professional services. And basically this occurs, particularly it has been claimed by Webster, that it occurs in the big field of delivering property, like property development, or delivering design quality. It's quite important to understand how this field works, where basically in one side we have those that are directly involved with delivering quality, delivering products of the built environment, which are developers and investors. On the other sides, we have the regulatory bodies, which are basically the institutions that are out there, be that local or central institutions. And we have what we call also those service providers. Now, this is something like of a different worldview, particularly because if you tell architects that in this big game field they are service providers, is a little bit like, you know, it's not demeaning, it's just a different point of view for this type of like gameplay. This is pretty much where as they are seeing, particularly here, it doesn't point anyway, as bringing specialist expertise to this whole property development field. And in here we're trying to tackle quite a lot of issues that were discussed downstairs, especially the whole idea of architects, whether they want to interchange with developers, or they prefer more to interact with local authorities, etc. However, what is more important here is to understand that particularly the undersupply by by developers of these professional services is related to the lack of quality in the built environment, so you don't deliver that. Now, this is one viewpoint, and is particularly advocated by the planning and design part of things, that they say that, yes, developers are the ones who are not delivering quality because we, from our side, we are producing quality from the design point of view. And this is typically what we call a particular market failure, that all the, like the individual incentives fail to deliver the bigger public good. This is interesting now, because what I've told you is just one side of the story. The other side of the story is developers, what we were discussing downstairs, meaning that you need to think of developers as well. Developers, what they have, they work in numbers, they work in cash flows. And developers have, for these specialized services that we're talking about, certain figures in their head, say around 10%. The moment that the 10% goes up, so those like high architectural services go up, they need to rethink and take some delivery from other sides, so probably go down in their own profits. And if I were to ask a question here, meaning like who among you, probably a lot of architects here, think that they should only exclusively interact with locals, or like authorities rather than just developers? Only authorities? No. Very good. I'm quite happy to hear that, because in quite a lot of settings, you would not be able to deliver a project just because developers are so powerful. There would be quite a lot of societies where local governments are very powerful, and they would be able to enforce high quality, but what we are assuming here is that local governments have the capacity to define what high quality is. Assume that, let's say, local governments in very small towns might not be able to have that capacity, and that's basically where most of this tragedy of the commons happens, because mainly in big cities, particularly property and land markets will enable the delivery of quality. And where it comes here, the link with economics in this case is like in the Article 13 of the Davos Declaration, we say that it is stated that high quality bioculture adds economic value, and that is quite a good thing to state. However, we don't have a lot of rough empirical evidence to support that, and this is basically what most of the planning and design literature has been claiming for so long until now. Particularly Matthew Carmona, who's gonna talk to us tomorrow, has coined the term the Holy Grail. So if we're able to tell people that quality sells, then we've probably found the Holy Grail. And that's where the link with economics comes to play, particularly in stating that if something sells that is of high quality, people want it because people like show their actions or show their decisions by their purse. So they're willing to pay for it because they derive better utility from the use of that particular good. There has been a body of work in academia tackling this particular issue that mainly uses econometric tools, quantitative analysis, to estimate what we call marginal prices. We will come to that a little bit just in a while. And particularly the pricing of quality, what I consider the interface, or better state, the lack of interface between design and economics. In pricing quality, actually, we have quite a lot of challenges. The biggest one, as we saw by all the keynote speeches, was the definition of quality. Quality is time, cultural, country, place-specific, so it's quite difficult to get those variables, or quantitative variables, to have the same outcome from one place to the other. And there is also the issue of the combination of the two, or the link of the two diametrically different disciplines. And what has been the practice out there is that the most common approach is what you do. You get a whole big group of experts. You try and give them scores as you were doing with the app, and try and average across those scores. What this does is this tackles the individual opinion bias. However, when you take those variables, so you have quantified something, the quality, when you take those variables and you use it in the econometric analysis, the quality of those variables is poor. So with a pun here, so the quality of the quality measures is quite poor. So what have econometricians done about it? They are using what is called proxies. So an example I'd like to give is proxy for what you call an permeability of the urban fabric. Say you measure it through the number of nodes, so intersections, divided by the number of segments. Another one can be the, let's say, transparency of a building at the ground level, so at human scale, which you can measure by the percentage of glass over the overall percentage or over bricks. That shows you a little bit about the transparency. However, what these approaches do, they try to standardize quality, and basically the biggest risk here, you really miss the essence of quality. And as the question that was asked downstairs, what are the obstacles to measuring the quality of Baukultur, is basically what I also like to call a type 1 tragedy of the commons, because the skill set which is needed to measure this is absolutely undersupplied by academia, because neither of the two fields, two diametrically different fields, have an incentive to dive into detail in the other. It's quite difficult to teach architects all these people in design in general that have that really, burst in design thinking and design approach, to teach the numbers and the quantitative approach that comes with econometrics, as it's quite difficult to try and teach the really very quantitative people, as econometricians are, how, say how all the design paradigms work that we base all of our design works on. So that is quite a little bit of a challenge, and this is, in my opinion, the reason why we, for the moment, we lack a little bit of, we lack a little bit the answer. So the biggest obstacle to trying to measure the quality of Baukultur. Now, measuring mechanism. I swear this is the first and last equation I show in there. No worries about it. But how is it done? It is basically done. It is basically done by based on theory, obviously, on economic theory, behavioral theory, and particularly also works on the basis that the price that you pay for a particular property, for a building, is based on the summation of different prices based on the bundle of characteristics that property has. And it's quite important here, the bundle of characteristics is large, is about age, size, layout, design, particularly the interior, etc. We will deal with that later. Location, distance to particular amenities, you name it, is really huge. And what you try and do there, you try and isolate your variable of importance. And that, what you try and do afterwards is you try and estimate those Greek letters there. And what it gives you implicit or marginal prices of particular building attributes, which is really directly associated with the willingness to pay of people, because they have paid for it, so you're investigating prices, the willingness to pay of people for that particular attribute. Since we're in Geneva, a very good example for this, maybe it's not directly related to the quality of the Baukultur, but is people willing to pay more to have an apartment with a view on the lake, for example. That is a classic example for it. And this type of approach, this mechanism, isolates that marginal price of the view, and does the same with the quality variables. This approach is quite straightforward for houses when we talk about utility. So the benefit that I derive from the use of that attribute, I'm willing to pay. It's a little bit different when you go to offices, because homes are bought or rented for personal use, whereas offices are a little bit different. Offices are different in the thing that firms rent offices and put in their employees so that they can work in there. And the price of an office building is determined by the rent that it can generate, and the rent, in turn, is determined by how much a firm is willing to pay for that particular place. And the willingness to pay here relates to the firm's particular goals, which are basically increase revenues or the share values. It is done in two ways: one by maximizing profit, and two by minimizing costs. And particularly profit maximization is linked to employee satisfaction. The satisfaction that you are at work, that you get from workplaces that are very, very well designed, and the firm will pay for that only if this increases the quality. Will pay for that quality only if this increases, maximizes their profit. There are quite some interesting. I need to speed up now because I'm being shown the time. But there are quite some interesting. There has been quite some interesting quantitative work that links satisfaction to productivity. However, there is a missing link in there that, takes this a step further to link it to paid prices or rents for offices. Some evidence, kind of mechanisms. It is no surprise that early works comes from people or researchers outside architecture or design studies. It's quite easy to use those proxies and put them in quantitative models. And what we have here is that in the 80s, the work in the States has claimed that rents in award-winning offices are higher, and rents in offices that were graded higher by experts for quality design are higher as well. More recent studies particularly investigate signature architecture impact, so buildings designed by architects who have won a prize. And there is evidence that those office buildings rent and sell for more than other office buildings in the same submarkets. So there's quite a good localized study. Our own work as well has done the same and has found that office buildings with higher design specification at the interior, so building side, exterior, facade, and the urban level, command rent premiums. So far for the evidence. Now, I'd like to think that is due to the evidence, but probably not, particularly in developed countries. So Western and Northern Europe, what we've seen is that there is increased awareness that quality sells. What it is with the issue with this thing is that these people are generally what I call trendsetters. So they are just the leaders in their profession, and they are roughly, I give a number of 5%, maybe it's 10% now, but the issue with this is it just needs to become mainstream. So people need to really put more emphasis on those softer values or delivering social value, etc. It's true that quality is a combination of factors. It will come with strong and committed local leadership, but that also has the knowledge about what really quality in the built environment is, because sometimes, particularly authorities that don't have the capacity, so authorities in under capacity, they probably might miss this link. And concluding remark, this is my last slide. A way forward is a common platform, particularly what was referred downstairs in the first talk as the horizontal linkage. So it would be a horizontal linkage among two professions, one economics and quantitatively approached, and the other one design that is more qualitative. There is really a good need for that. Article 16 particularly use the words of interdisciplinary, multi-level, and cross-sectoral cooperation for this. There is no other way. We have to come together and to try and understand also especially how to measure this. Particularly more quantitative approaches are desired, especially trying to convince developers that quality sells. In the academic field that I said about the undersupply of skills, mostly what I've been seeing is that planning and build environment schools are more willing to take a step ahead towards this because they have started using more, like approaching or incorporating more real estate departments, which can provide those kind of skill sets. And yeah, okay, I talked about this, but there is also a very nice quotation in econometrics that says that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So don't take everything for granted. Thank you very much.